episode 52. We are here with special guest, the 3D print general, Sean. Go ahead and give yourself kind of an intro. I normally tell people to just tell people where you, what's your name, what's your kind of profession, where you came from.
Yeah, real brief, I do 3D printing tutorials and reviews on my main channel called the 3D Print General, which is what you see right there. And I started getting involved with the 3D printed gun community I started, I think, around middle of 2021 is when I really got into it. Met all the guys, and I just kind of fell down a rabbit hole and started printing a bunch of guns and filming them. And my main channel would host all of those. Eventually, YouTube started coming after them. So there's a second channel called the 3D Pew General, and I upload all my 3D printed gun videos there. I can't touch them on live streams, but there's just three of the dozen or so that I've made. And yeah, that's a real brief summary of what I do.
Perfect. Yeah, so I kind of I wanted to have you on to talk about kind of what 3D, the kind of culture around 3D printed guns, maybe a little bit of the history of how they came about and how, obviously how you got involved in them. I think a good place to start is that I'm from Alaska, and so we have a lot of, there's guns are pretty common up here. It's kind of I think there's something like, I think there's three times the amount of guns here than people or something like that is the number, but because we have a low population, but there's just a lot of firearms. So I've got to shoot some 3D printed guns just from people here. I have the FGC9, I think, is the abbreviation, but the fuck gun control 9 is the,
Yep.
which is great. That I got to shoot that. I've got to shoot like some Glock 19 frames that were printed and stuff like that. Obviously, you're not printing the internals and stuff. But I guess what is your like with 3D printing guns in the position they are now? Like, how easy is it? Like how, and this is something that I mean from a perspective of like the layman at home. I understand kind of how simple it is from that perspective, but with the internet and the things that are available to people, it how prevalent is it?
Yeah, so 3D printing in itself does have a learning curve of some sort. It's getting less and less as better printers continue to come out and don't require as much maintenance and knowledge. But essentially, if you're able to 3D print any object, you will be able to 3D print at least a Glock lower, like the one you see behind me. The When you just need to print a lower, it isn't that difficult because it's not that difficult of geometry. And then you just need to order the parts online for the lower parts kit and the slide and the barrel and all that stuff. And then it's just a matter of putting it together, which takes, 20 minutes. So a Glock lower is pretty simple. Once you're able to print any object, you should be able to figure it out. Of course, after you read the README on the design that you're downloading.
Right.
But something a little more complicated like the FGC9, which is behind me, or the Orca, you can still do it just as easy as printing a normal object, but you might need to understand what different settings do a little bit more because, like, for the Orca, for instance, Hoffman includes the guy who designed the sorry, I'm calling it all these names. The AR-15 that's behind me that is 3D printed is called the Orca, and that requires you just knowing a little bit more knowledge of how the settings work on a slicer. But other than that, I mean, honestly, if you watch a few tutorial videos and are really wanting to figure this out, you can do it in a week, no problem.
Right. And that's I've watched a lot of the videos and stuff like that. I've written a few articles. This was 2 3 years ago about specifically what I was writing about was the use of the Liberator. Because the files that created the Liberator were based on ended up going in other countries, and so I was writing about how that helped because there were a couple different communities that were, rebel groups that were fighting against governments that were killing them. That ended up using some of that. They had access to 3D printers and things like that. And so I was reading into like the uses in other countries and like emergency situations and how they've actually been kind of utilized. And I think what a lot of people miss is that from my understanding, like once you have the knowledge of how to do it, and there's a pretty basic set amount of supplies that are needed once you have that knowledge. So it is something that becomes a bit more like, if you were, traveling out of country, dealing with that kind of stuff, emergency situations, apocalyptic stuff. It seems to fit in not only the prepper's corner of the tool belt, but also just the gun nuts. It's not like just it's something that I feel like 3D printing at this point is useful for anybody who is knowledgeable to any degree about firearms. Because even if you're just building, not necessarily putting together a full firearm, but I've had friends that have built like, trigger stops and safety things and stuff like that from 3D printing. Just because the one on their other gun broke and it's a part that costs like $15 and they don't want to have to order it, situations like that. But it does seem fairly intuitive now, especially that it's been in the, kind of mainstream for a while, at least on the internet. It seems like 3D printing guns has become kind of the, more openly talked about and just discussed en masse. Like before, it was like forums and things like that. I would have to go places to read about it. Now it's much more, kind of everywhere.
Yeah,
uh,
and once the knowledge is out there, you can't bring it back in. So it really is one of those things where there isn't really. They say that you can't stop the signal is the slogan for this
right,
community, and it honestly you can't because what are you going to do? You're going to regulate 3D printers because I can build a 3D printer from some basic Home Depot parts and a couple other parts, and I can print anything I need because I have the printers already. But it really is not something you can't put the genie back in the bottle. And
right.
then also, yeah, it really is kind of decentralizing self-defense is kind of how some people say it, where you don't need to ask for permission or go to some entity, kind of similar to the way crypto is, where if you want your own self-defense, you can do it. Yeah. Hey, 3D Musketeers. I was just on his podcast last week and I told him how I was nervous before podcast. So he came in to say that.
uh, so yeah, it seems to me like, and that was actually, you brought up a good point there. I had a coworker who chatted about 3D printing with me, and we were talking about the Ghost Gunner because I have a buddy who lives down here in the city that I'm in who has one of those, and he kind of uses it in tandem with 3D printing. So it's sort of like he has both of these things because they go
Yeah.
together. He can print all the small parts for like an AR with the 3D printer, and then he prints, takes an actual block of aluminum and can create a lower. And so you end up with this situation where you can have the best of both worlds. Like
Yeah.
you can have so it's sort of a perfect setup in my opinion. And we were chatting with this other coworker of mine about it, and they were talking about how, well, the reality is they just need to regulate 3D printers, and he pulled out his phone and Googled a video on YouTube, searched up a video on YouTube of a guy building a 3D printer out of like random parts
Yeah.
from like, a Lowe's and some other, um, hardware store, and putting this together with like a couple parts from Amazon and some random, and
Yeah.
just building it. It was like, yeah, there's no regulating that. Like it's almost like they talk about gun regulation in general, even without 3D printers, and then you look at a situation like the assassination that happened a little while ago where the guy used a taped together pipe bomb
Yeah.
shotgun that looked like something out of Mad Max Fury Road,
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so it definitely seems like, even if even in lieu of 3D printing, it's like you can make my dad back in the day when he was a kid, they used to blow stuff up. That's what you did for fun. I
Yeah.
mean,
I was gonna say, and this whole 3D printing community started as an open source community
hmm
where it wasn't a giant company that came in and created a 3D printer. It was individuals and researchers and all this stuff figuring out methods to do it, and it was all documented the whole way. And so they weren't buying parts from companies that made 3D printer parts. They were buying parts that they turned into 3D printer parts. And so
right.
even from the beginning of this movement, it wasn't something that you could stop that way.
Yeah, and I mean there's it seems that there's now with the media the way it is, and now that it is kind of out of the bottle, there's those smaller forums that used to exist turned into like the mainstream, and so now you have channels like yours, you have channels like that I've seen just around. Obviously, we had somebody in the chat whose name is 3D Musketeers who had you on, so obviously they're in that community to some degree. It's like so that's a great example of it. It's like now it's well 3D printing and 3D printing guns has its own little mainstream niche where it can kind of put the information out there and make it publicly available and in a
Well,
decentralized way. So it's not like, yeah, YouTubers get demonetized, they get banned or silenced, and that happens all the time. Unfortunately, you mentioned stuff about your channel getting knocked down, and it's like the reality is, I think in the long run, it's like now there's so many of those people though. Eventually, channels like yours and other people's are going to grow to such a size that if YouTube messes with them, it's messing with their pocketbook. And that's when it becomes hard for them to take these content creators off platforms. I think we saw that happen with like the gun review channels,
mhm.
where I mean, right, we just had YouTube change the restrictions where you couldn't load firearms or screw on suppressors, things like that on camera, and then those exact YouTubers, who the gun reviewers, raised such a hell about it that that was reversed and that was taken out of or at least reworded to not ban people for that. And so it's like that to me is how the 3D printer niche has to get eventually. They've got to get to the point where they're kind of a power player in their own market.
Yeah, and I think some of the people could be big players when it comes to entertainment wise, and they've been. That's the thing. I think YouTube might see us as they're not big enough yet, so we can stop them now.
Right.
If you, I don't know if you know a guy named Print Shoot Repeat. He's a
Yes,
YouTuber.
yes, yes, yes.
Phenomenal videos. I
And
mean,
he has millions of subs, I think now,
no,
doesn't he?
he's like
Or
350,000 or something
or
like that.
350,000.
Yeah,
Okay, okay, okay. But
yeah.
that's
He's
still huge. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, and he
yeah.
he got over I think 150,000 in the first year on YouTube. Makes phenomenal. He makes music. He does everything, and he
He did the
shoot.
HK slap
Yep,
song. I think I
yep.
played that on this stream like 10 episodes ago.
Yeah, and someone like him, I think he was on pace to be millions of subscribers. To be up there with the big guys. But then they just came after him, and he ended up taking down pretty much all of his 3D printed gun videos, which were like
Right.
90% of his catalog.
Yeah.
And so, I agree with you, but I think that they come after people once they realize, oh, this guy might be big, because I think I see no reason he couldn't be a 10 million subscribed channel. He makes
Well,
his
the
videos are
editing
that
and
quality.
everything
Yeah.
was, yeah, it was perfect. And so you have to wonder. Well, and I think too with YouTube being kind of a political beast at this point and a lot of the decisions they make, a lot of it comes down to the fact that if you get on somebody's radar who just doesn't like you, who happens to be behind the computer, at that company, it seems like you can just get screwed,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate. I do agree with you. I think they definitely are going after. I mean, YouTube in general, I think definitely coordinates to go after like quote niches or movements that are kind of coming up in the ranks. I
Yeah.
think I've seen that over and over again in like niches of comedy, like skit comedy stuff too, where you saw YouTube just kind of decide we don't like this content anymore because it doesn't get watch time.
Yeah.
So they would just kind of arbitrarily police it. And I think you definitely see that in gun content still. It's just on much smaller content creators because if it goes on the radar of anybody bigger, it's something that can be called out and pointed out. I think I see this a lot in the LawTube community or the YouTube like lawyer
Mhm.
community where it's like if you get over a certain YouTube threshold to where you're on the bigger creators' radar, you can't really be screwed with because if they mess with your channel, there's going to be backlash, and that
Yeah.
leads to Twitter movements, and it's absolutely horrible
Yeah.
that on this gigantic platform where there's millions of hours of content going up a day, you have to go to Twitter to get help with any issue that you have on their platform.
Oh, it's insane. I've thought the same thing where, okay, so if I'm not on Twitter, nobody is going to review my thing because and
Yeah.
I always thought, when I started my channel years ago, that when you hit 100,000 subscribers, you got a YouTube contact. I don't know where I heard that before. That's not true. I have 100,000. I do not have a contact. Print Shoot Repeat has 350,000. He doesn't have a contact. So that's why, I mean, I think it's now like probably like a million subscribers, then you'll get a contact and be able to
So
talk back.
it is, unfortunately, I have done a decent amount of research over the years, and just because I've been like on YouTube and watch a lot of people who've talked openly about it. My understanding is it used to be that once you got to like 150,000 subs, you went into kind of a list on YouTube's thing, and they would pick you up eventually and give you a channel partner, as they call it. But my understanding now is that that has shifted to where it's completely arbitrary. They're not looking at sub counts anymore at all. It's mostly based off of the entire analytics. But I've seen channels with 25, 30,000 subs have channel partners.
Really?
So it is completely arbitrary. If somebody has a video that goes viral, they get maybe a jump in the statistics and they're looking at it. They're just picking people, or they're just picking them literally at random. But I've seen channels with 50, 60,000 get them, and it doesn't. The thing is like, I think people have a general misunderstanding. It's like, I've talked to two YouTubers I used to do some like editing and writing stuff for, and they talked about like their other YouTuber friends who were bigger who had channel partners.
Mhm.
And it was like, yeah, they're not as much of a help, because the reality is there's like, at this point, thousands of channel partners. And so they're all just basically going to one big channel partner at YouTube and going, this guy that we support wants help. And it's like half the time they don't even listen to those guys.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like you can't really, like, it almost seems like, unless you have, and I think we saw this with Nick Rekieta recently, where he got nuked off Twitter, and then the Twitter files came out and stuff like that. And it proved that what Twitter was doing was similar to what YouTube does, which is, if there was enough stink raised on the Twitter end of things, then YouTube would flag it in their system in the back end and say, there's a movement on Twitter that wants this thing restored, and that would immediately go to somebody higher up who would review it and make a decision,
Which is
right?
crazy because it's not you have to be on somebody else's platform to get their
Exactly. And
attention.
so
Yeah.
vice versa.
Yeah.
People who were having issues over on Twitter were having were like raising stink with Twitter support not getting any support about it, and then would go make a YouTube video about
Yeah.
it, which would get millions of views and get pushed to the trending page, and all of a sudden Twitter's responding on their platform. And
Yeah.
so it's like, what topsy turvy horseshit
Yeah, yeah.
are we doing here?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it really is it really is frustrating. We've kind of given up in our community. We kind of I don't think many of us are going to be left by the end of this year on YouTube. At least 3D printed guns shooting them at least. And
Right.
so yeah, we're all on Odyssey and Rumble and Utreon and all these alternatives, but I don't know. We're trying to find a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel because those just don't get views. There's no way around it, and I just don't see us lasting very long with current trends.
Rumble is a frustrating one for me,
Really frustrating.
because their live streaming setup is garbage, and there's a it just is. And the platform sort of has a look like old school YouTube, but uh the live stream numbers are completely made up.
Yeah,
Like, for all the larger creators, like, and you can tell, I mean, listen, I've watched YouTube since I was fucking 12 at this point. I've been in a lot of live streams. I know how chat works.
yeah,
And if I go into a stream that has 7, 8,000 viewers on it, I know what that chat's going to look like.
yeah,
And it's like, these aren't real views. Like, these people aren't really getting these views. It's the same thing that was done with like Nick Fuentes's platform back in the day. I think that's still running. I can't remember the name of it. But Cozy, that was the name of it. Cozy was the same thing. it's like all inflated. They just decide what the number is going to be. You can apply like a 4 times, 5 times, 2 times, and it'll just multiply the view count by that many.
That makes sense because I was actually my hypothesis. I never actually went into one of these live streams. I just would always see, all these creators getting hundreds of thousands of views, and my Rumble videos get crap. And so I was under the impression that they weren't really competing with YouTube in the sense of this isn't anybody can upload videos and will suggest it. It's
Right.
more we will promote the people we're paying, like Russell
Exactly.
Brand and Steven Crowder.
That's exactly what's
Yeah,
happening.
and
You,
we're gonna push the shit out of their stuff and never suggest your video.
hmm
That's kind of what I was thinking was
So
happening.
there is no, at least from what I understand at this point, from everything I've looked at in the past like couple months, because I've been looking at it kind of intently. There is no really discoverability on Rumble unless you're literally picked by an admin and pushed to the front page. The reality is that they have these contracted YouTubers who they paid, and I assume in every single one of their contracts it includes something like, "Hey, you get on the front page this many times a month."
Yeah,
And so those slots are pretty much already sold.
yeah,
And the reason that is because Rumble got all this investment money to play around with. But at the end of the day, they have to get advertisers. And they have ads that run, but you can see them when they do. They're all trash ads. You know that they're not getting very much money for those ads. So the only way that they can fix that is to expand the market, get more people on the service. So they're having to keep contracting out to these people because they think that's the solution. But the problem is that unfortunately, every alt platform does the same thing, which is they immediately fall into the right wing category or the right category. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just the nature of it. It just seems to always happen. And so the solution I've seen to that is like you have to almost bite the bullet and pay people you don't like. Like you've
yeah,
got to start getting over hardcore people that are not on the side you are because you need to split the fan base. You need to get people in the platform in general. That's never going to happen on Rumble because of the people they have investing into it and who's kind of behind the scenes. And from the mechanical angle of it, there's like the perfect example of this is the quartering. The quartering is friendly with Steven Crowder. He makes tons of daily videos. His channel is a perfect algorithm channel. Like
mhm,
it just cranks views out. He uploads videos to Rumble, and you can go look at the view count. They'll have 600 views,
wow,
700 views. This is a guy who on YouTube is pulling hundreds of thousands of views on every video he puts out. So it doesn't make sense. And it to me what it shows is that there is no fan crossover, and those 700 views are from people who specifically searched his name
yeah,
and found his videos. And so there isn't much going after that. Like you can't expand on it. At least on Odyssey, you know, the videos will pop up in places. The problem with Odyssey is there just isn't a huge user base.
yeah, exactly.
So
And Odyssey also, I've noticed from people I've talked to who are completely different political than me. They're very liberal or whatever. They go to Rumble's homepage and they instantly are turned off by all of the suggested videos. And but at least Odyssey, when you go to their homepage and you're not logged in, it's going to be like Veritasium and very. It's not going to be political videos that are shoved down your face, which is smart of them. Even though I'm sure they're right leaning
right,
as a platform, but they're not. They figured out their algorithm to be like, hey, when you come to visit our page, here's science videos and stuff like that to
right.
not scare away because you want all political types on your platform.
Well, and to give them credit again, the platform that they built doesn't look like YouTube. It
Hmm.
has a little bit of variation. It has a different style to it. There's Rumble like when the UI. I mean, the chat function was horrible. They tried to
Yeah,
fix that, and it's gotten a little bit better, but it's still not great. And the biggest problem for me is that in order to stream on there, you had to put like a 1 minute B-roll video, which is the goofiest setting I've ever seen. And then you have to like sign there's weird waiver options before you get to the streaming process, and then you get a custom RTMP instead of just being able to guide it through restream or
yeah,
anything else. So then I have to kind of do it weirdly, and it's a janky process. So it gets to the point where, at least with Odyssey, you can just click a button and I can just mirror the videos, like, and it's
Yeah.
done. It seems like a sort of a waste of time, especially if I go on the platform and a bunch of the videos are like not really getting viewed. Like, the vast majority of videos on Rumble are just sitting there in stasis. It's sort
Yeah.
of weird.
That's why
Like, it,
I don't call it a YouTube alternative just because
no.
the idea behind YouTube is you upload videos, not a select couple dozen people that we choose to pay money are the ones who
The
are.
value of YouTube is not video hosting. The value of YouTube is the algo. It's
Yeah.
the algorithm. It's the fact that when you put a video out, it can be viewed by people if you share it properly. Like, I made a documentary on this channel about this character, not character, but a guy from Alaska named Joe Vogler. And that's like the most viewed video on the channel because I shared it on Reddit and put it out on Twitter and made sure it was kind of spread around. And I worked a while on it. But you realize, well, yeah, the reason that has more views is because it was more watchable, and so it just got pushed to more people. Like,
Yeah.
the algorithm does work in that sense if people
Yeah.
understand how to use it.
And it's also like that I can't blame people for not using Odyssey or Rumble to watch my videos because I don't use Odyssey and Rumble because it's like, yeah, I like gun videos. Yeah, I like some political videos, but I like comedy videos and I like random videos. And YouTube on my homepage will always seem to
Right.
suggest to me the video I want to watch. And like I said, it's, probably 8 times out of 10, it's not gun or politics. It's something like a comedian I like. And I'm not going to get suggested that on Rumble or Odyssey.
I look for gun stuff on Rumble, but it's the same neutered stuff that is
Really?
on YouTube. So that's because of the mirror effect,
Yeah.
because people don't treat Rumble as a YouTube alternative. They're treating it as a video hosting platform to dump extra mirrors of your videos so that if you get hit off YouTube, you have a place to go. The problem with that is that there's nothing unique on Rumble, so no one's going to go there. They're just going to stay on YouTube until you get banned and then roll the dice as to whether they go look up your channel name on Rumble, which, if you're Crowder, you might get somebody to do, but if you're Todd from Minnesota who has 8,000 subs and gets banned, you're going to get maybe 100 people who go
Yeah.
onto that platform and actually follow you over there. And so, you kind of just have to start over. I don't really make content at this point to try to like branch out and get views as much, but it's fun to kind of talk to people who get views, which is an irritating thing because you almost have to. I've learned that, like, as long as if you can keep a good Twitter following going and you keep a good thing on there, it makes it easier to get guests because people are like, oh, this is a sane person.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
uh, versus not really having any other socials. Like, if you're just a YouTuber and you've got like 100 200 subs and you want to go interview people or have people on the channel and you don't have a Twitter account that has any activity or you don't have any socials other than YouTube, you're just kind of screwed.
Yeah.
Like, you're just stuck emailing people and hoping they respond, and that doesn't really work. It's like, so it's Rumble just doesn't have that. They don't have a community that's doing that. And locals, this is what I'll give credit to them. Locals to me is far more successful than Rumble. Locals is actually a way for people. It's just a Patreon alternative. Everybody wanted to get rid of Patreon. Uh, Locals sort of filled that void. And at the same time, the chat function's decent. The live streaming stuff's good. You can use Rumble or you can use Locals as almost a YouTube replacement if you just want to talk to your community. And
Yeah, I
so,
actually I signed up for Locals just because they reached out to me and they said, "Oh, you don't care about 3D printed guns?" And like, as long as you're not nudity, then we're fine with it. So,
yeah, and
yeah,
even nudity, like, there's they bridge the gap there
yeah,
because it's like you can't show like grotesque nudity, but it's kind of up to them and you just have to moderate the chat. So I've been in a couple live stream chats where people dropped photos because, again, that's one of the things I like about locals is because it's geared towards just the people who come to you. uh they allow, like, in the chat functions and all that, you can just post memes and photos and, like, almost just like Discord, in a sense, and then you can do voice live streams or
yeah.
with your camera and stuff, and it's like, yeah, I like that. But getting more on the subject of the 3D printing stuff, what is what is your opinion on like the I guess political side of it with the whole movement of the laws and stuff? What do you see in the next like couple years of this presidency, and is there going to be any kind of crazy action against 3D printing? Has there been in the last, you know, year or so, and has it done anything?
In 3D printing specific, I actually don't think there was any laws. There was a lot of people who thought there was when there was that ghost gun thing that Biden was doing, but that was specific to the P80 builds, which are I'm sure you know, but I don't know if everybody knows, where you buy a like a Glock lower receiver, but it doesn't have the holes drilled out, so it's not considered a gun, and then you drill those holes out, and now it's a gun. Um, those are no longer allowed, and so people are making like 78% receivers or whatever. They're trying to figure out what's legal. But 3D printing, no, there hasn't been anything specific to 3D printing. And I don't, well, there has been in states, certain states like California.
Right.
If you want to 3D print a gun, you need to actually, you might not even be allowed to anymore, but you used to have to register it with the state, which defeats the whole purpose. But you had to get a serial number and put on a block of metal and put it on the gun, and defeats the whole purpose. But um, other than state specific, I don't think there's been anything federally. And to be honest, I don't think there can be, just because we're not like we're building something from scratch. You can still hear me, right? I think I'll
Yeah.
there you go. Cool. We're building it from scratch, and building your own gun has always been legal in the country. So that would really, you can't ban 3D printing guns unless you ban making your own gun from scratch. But I wouldn't put it past the ATF to now all of a sudden start serializing barrels. I don't know, like,
Right.
something where it doesn't target 3D printing specific, but it will affect us drastically if now, like I said, a barrel is serialized and, we can't 3D print our barrel. So what are we going to do? Obviously, there are builds like the FGC 9, which allow you to make your own barrel at home, but it requires a little bit more than just a 3D printer. But yeah, that's kind of where I see it going. I wouldn't put it past the ATF from signing some law that regulates other parts besides just the lower receiver,
Right.
but I don't see them targeting 3D printing specifically.
Yeah, I definitely think and I think this is where people probably miss it, is I think they're targeting what I think they want to target is the ghost Glocks, or however they want to refer to it. Where in reality, it's just 80% lower. That thing.
Yeah.
I think they want to get that out of the market specifically because in all of these high crime areas where guns are quote illegal, like that is much easier to obtain than a full firearm. And so I've been to areas like, um, you know, nastier city areas where I'm like, how are all these guns like floating around? And you go on Snapchat in that area and you could see videos of people literally just making Glocks, and it's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, so I get what's going on here. Like they closed and it's by no fault of the manufacturers of these things, and I do not think they should be regulated at all. But my position is the reason that's happening is because of the regulations on the firearms in those areas where that
100%.
exists. It's You're not going to see people having that issue in Florida or Texas or Alaska because no one's restricting their ability to just go out and buy the gun or buy it privately. But in places like New York or Chicago or Seattle, those kind of areas, then yeah, you are gonna see that because
Yeah, and this does put them into a strange box of properly defining what a firearm is, because they're now saying anything that can be, I think, readily converted into a firearm is a firearm. So that's how they were able to classify these 80% receivers as firearms, because it could be readily converted. But how easy does it have to be for it to be readily convertible? And that's where, like, a lot of people are testing the waters, where it's like, okay, well, now you have to drill this part out too. Is that a fire? Oh, now you
yeah.
have to drill out this part. And it's like, how far back do we have to go into? Yeah,
At what point does me having a container of gunpowder, a pipe, and a piece of wood in my house constitute me being able to put together a firearm?
exactly. And that's what, like, Cody Wilson over at
Uh-huh.
Defense Distributed, who does the Ghost Gunner, is trying to do, where he has the 0% receiver, where it's
Right.
just a block of aluminum and it's like, okay, well, you can't regulate blocks of aluminum as guns. So Yeah, so I consider 3D printing a gun very similar to a 0% receiver. It's like we're starting from scratch here. There's
Yeah.
no way you can call this block of aluminum a gun.
We're not
And so
just
yeah,
we're baking the entire cake.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. And
yeah,
so but where in between the block and the P80 do they say, "Okay, this is no longer a gun?" And that's
yeah.
where I think that we're gonna see waters tested, at least in on that side.
Well, it seems to me that the whole debate on it is sort of mute in a subject because again, the cat's out of the bag. But I see the labeling other like parts and things like that is something I've definitely thought about with like barrels because I have some older guns which it was common back then for them to serialize the like barrel instead of the other parts of the gun. So there's a few like old school firearms that are like that. And I was like, if they just did this today, they'd be able to like stop everybody from shipping these. And I'm like, well, now that makes more sense. Like that's probably exactly what they'll try.
Yeah,
Uh,
and that's
I
honestly something I've been afraid of, is that exact thing.
and it's yeah, I think obviously there's the meme toot of the meme of the ATF banning shoelaces because of
Yeah,
the old they tried to ban. I think what was that? That was a shoelace you wrapped around. It was a specific rifle, I think,
and it
that
was able to,
allowed you
like,
to.
pull the trigger, so it was, like,
Yeah,
made it auto.
yeah. It was sort of like bump fire, but like awkward. Like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know. It wasn't very useful, I don't think, but I think some people liked it. I don't. It was an old school thing, but that was yeah, that's where that meme comes from. And I remember seeing that recently. I'm like, yeah, that's just a reality again because, I mean, they could claim you could turn that shoelace into a part of a gun. They're just gonna start claiming that that's a firearm. Like,
But, yeah, and we're talking about barrels, if they started, serializing that, that would definitely, screw up most of what we're doing, but that's why I'm so, supportive of people like I don't know if you heard of Suckboy Tony, the username,
hmm,
so
I saw something on Twitter
yeah.
recently.
So he's been developing for a while. It's called the plasma pump, is what he calls it. It is a pump action, electrically ignited. So the trigger is not a trigger; it's a button, and it does a plasma electrical ignition. And he makes the ammo at home. It's black powder with and he 3D prints the case, and then he melts the lead for the bullet, puts it in, and when he pushes the button, it ignites the black powder, and the bullet and the casing shoots out the front, and the barrel itself is just it's a 3D printed barrel, but with a smooth bore pipe around it
Hidden
for
on
reinforcement,
okay.
and all of the parts. No, there's not a single gun part in his gun, and it really does. I want further advancement on that sort of stuff so that, when they finally do decide to put serial numbers on barrels, we
Right.
have, 5 projects like his where we don't need barrels and he's getting, I think he's getting over 1,000 feet per second every shot. And the bullets themselves are 50 caliber size bullets. And so it is a very functional, useful gun. And you can't even say, well, where do you get the ammo? He's making the ammo in his house. So, and black powder, I mean, you can make it from urine. So, like, there really
Right.
is no way to stop
Well,
that.
I grew up with because I grew up in Alaska. My step grandfather he loves black powder stuff. And back when still this day, but back when I was younger, um, he made all his own ammunition and all that, and he had multiple guns that he had made himself. He learned like not necessarily how to rifle a barrel, but how to semi rifle a barrel at home with his like equipment that he had for woodworking and stuff. And so he had this whole process he did. But I mean, he could build a 50 caliber muzzle loader for hunting like large game up here out of his garage. And
Yeah.
like he was literally like, get woodworking tools, make a stock, and make like go
Yeah.
get a couple screws and make fashion some kind of brass piece to hold it all in place, and like so it's kind of crazy to see somebody start from like just random stuff around the house and then get to the end and have a gun.
Yeah.
And he would build them from kits too and stuff, but like the idea of just being able to just build it, out of thin air was kind of interesting. And yeah, I think 3D printing definitely does that same thing in a sense, just in a more modern day and age. Although
And
I
with
do think black powder stuff is still relevant because you can hunt some pretty gigantic animals with one of those muzzle loaders.
yeah, and what was I gonna say? And I believe he's using black powder because it actually slower burning versus the gunpowder, so it's not a ton of explosive force on the 3D printed part all at once. It's kind of
That
more
makes sense.
spread out.
Yeah.
And speaking of barrels, you're talking about he was kind of rifling them at home. Anybody who doesn't know who's watching this, there's a process that a guy named Jeff Rodriguez figured out in 2018 called ECM rifling, electrochemical machining. And so we are now making barrels at home with just like $100 to $200 in parts. What it does is you 3D print the rifling, the inside. You get the smooth bore that is meant, that is the proper size. You might have to make it the size for the bullet. You put your 3D print inside of it, and then you run a pump with salt water that goes through the grooves on your rifling, and it erodes the rifling into your barrel. And so that's what the FGC 9 uses, is
Huh.
an ECM rifled barrel. And that's why, I don't know if any of you saw the Plastic Defense documentary about Jay Stark, who was one of the main developers of the FGC 9. He was in Europe, and it's like, well, how did he get the barrel? And it's like, well, he probably made it in his bathtub with an ECM rifling kit. And so
Right.
there are ways around it. It's just not like the Glock, like I was saying, that takes me, it takes very little knowledge to print a Glock lower.
Right. Yeah.
But if you want to ECM rifle your own barrel, it's probably going to take you a decent amount more reading.
It's the next step, right?
Yeah.
In the learning process. But I think it's sort of like any other hobby in a way, where it's like once you get bitten by the bug, you're probably going to want to learn more about just about everything.
Yeah.
That's how I always am when I find something new to get interested in.
Yeah,
I
and that's
think
why like the FGC 9 is actually being used in Myanmar right now by the rebels against the military junta government, because they are making their barrels in bathtubs.
right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think his process involved some kind of acid of some kind.
Mm.
I'd have to like sit down and talk to him, and it'd be interesting to find out what he did because they looked good. And I'm
Yeah.
like, there's probably people who would love to know how that process works
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because he was using like woodworking stuff. That was like his main like stuff. He did leather work and
Mhm.
woodworking stuff. So I think he was just always handy with
I
that
think he
stuff.
needs a YouTube channel.
Yeah, I think he's. This is a guy who's never had a TV in the house.
Ah,
He doesn't have a cell phone. He uses only a landline. He's had the same VTech landline for 30 years. I mean,
wow.
the same phone that's been
Yeah.
sitting there. Yeah, he builds. He was My family were the first family to live in this place called Camelot year round in Alaska, which at the time was kind of just a place with giant trees and a
Yeah.
bunch of snow and bears and moose. And then he just, every time somebody'd move up there and kick rocks or something, he'd buy up their property and kind of expand on. But he never worked for anybody. He always built houses for people. So he just made all his money building people houses. So now up there in that neighborhood, like there's like 6 or 7 houses still up there that are like the bigger places that he put up back then. But he still has a couple places he lives in up there. The whole place is called Camelot, and all the names of the streets are related to the um, King Arthur story.
Yeah.
So it's all like Sir Lancelot Drive and like stuff like that. But it's a cool spot in Alaska because it's just these gigantic trees. It's almost like redwoodish kind of area where the trees are just insanely big. They're like because they've just been they were up there growing forever. There wasn't really a settler community that went through that area, so no one ever logged it. So it's just still gigantic trees that are like like the size of like small vehicles, wide. So it's like kind of nutty. But that
I
whole
can
area, he used to build all kinds of firearm stuff, and that's where I learned to shoot. And up there was just
Nice.
go.
Yeah. I actually never even So I was mentioning this in a recent podcast. I grew up in California for the first 30 years of my life, and I was basically a normal California liberal until I was like 22 or something like that. And so yeah, I didn't even shoot a gun until my mid 20s, probably, or early 20s.
So that's actually funny. I grew up with, so my mom had bad experiences with firearms when she was younger, and she had, so when she got older and moved to Alaska and stuff, she sort of like neutered the gun culture that my dad had. And then eventually, I call it, she went off the rails. My mom went a little loopy. It's a whole thing. But she once she was not the one making decisions, then firearms were back on the back on the
Nice,
table. And so then, I had my 30-30s and stuff. I'm into like cowboy guns, like old guns.
nice.
I like 30-30s, 44 magnums, 45 long cold old stuff. But that's also because I'm up here in Alaska. I imagine my taste will change when I move, because up here it's like, well, everybody has 44s because of bears, and everybody uses 12 gauges because of home protection, and like ARs aren't even that really common here. I know like that, it's not like it's much more common for you to walk in a home and find a Marlin 30-30 or a Henry rifle than you are to find an AR.
Hmm.
Because it's like, oh, I have my 45-70 if I need to blow a gigantic cannon-sized hole in
Yeah,
something, and that's it. Like,
yeah,
because most of the people just, if it's not a self-defense gun or a home protection, defense gun, it's just a gun for giant animals. So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
just something that's like some ungodly thing. I mean, there's, yeah, the 500 Magnum. I mean, that was the original, like, I think the original line name for it was the Smith and Wesson Alaskan, because that was the same thing. It was like that gun was like, we want something bigger than a 44. So here's this 500. See if your wrist survives. Well,
yeah. You said when I move. So are you planning on moving?
I am, at this job that I have currently, the hotel I work at's getting sold. I do like auditing and accounting paperwork stuff. So when that ends here, I'm probably heading towards Florida.
Oh,
But
nice. Oh, that's a big
um,
weather change for you.
yeah, I vacation over there a lot, and
Okay.
I do a lot of events all around like the U.S. and stuff. I might take like an out of country trip before I move. I haven't decided yet. I kind of want to go somewhere crazy. I've talked about that on the channel, but I'm like, I'm gonna go somewhere no one else goes, like,
Yeah.
because I think it'd be fun to write about. So I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Afghanistan seems played out at this point, but I'm like looking in areas where it's like you might die. Like
Well,
there's a chance you're gonna die. Like,
one of my buddies just went to Romania. He's in Romania right now, so he's
okay,
right next. He's doing something with the war. I have no idea. But not involved in the war. But he just went over there. He's trying to get into med school, so he's doing something with like medical stuff over there. But yeah, he's over in Romania, so you can check out Eastern Europe. I'm sure that's real
that's
sketchy right about now.
there's spots over there I'm looking at. I've thought about like, yeah, I've thought, I don't really want to do the Africa thing because there's just not a ton of like historical stuff I want to document up there that hasn't already been like written about a lot.
Mhm.
I want to try to find something that's like, hey, we haven't seen this artifact for 50 years, so we don't know if it exists.
Oh hell
Or
yeah!
we think this place might have got blown up, but we don't know. Like that
Some
kind of thing.
Indiana Jones shit.
Yeah, I want to find something I can write about that hasn't been written about. Is sort of the objective.
Nice. Well,
So
I obviously don't have a suggestion in that regard.
it's gonna be wild. I'm looking at like some interesting spots, but I haven't locked in yet whether I'm gonna do that before I move or after, because either way is possible.
You
Uh,
could just go to like a dying city like Detroit and just pretend that
Shannon.
you're like nobody has seen these in decades. It's
Just Southside Chicago.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, yeah, Shannon in the chat talking about Florida. She's one of the people over there wants me to move over that way.
Nice.
I Florida is cool. I've spent time over there. I like it. I've spent lots of time in like Texas. I have family over there. I've got Spent time in Arizona and Vegas and California and that whole stretch. I have my family goes back like a long time in California because of like uh, well, we're all Jewish, so it's sort of all sort
Same,
of
same with my mom and my family. Yeah.
yeah. We're the my grandfather was like a set designer and like a stage magician over there, and then we had a bunch of tangential family members that got connected to Hollywood stuff. So like
Mhm.
my third cousin was Gilda Radner, who was on SNL,
Hmm.
and then I had like random people who just did stuff in like Chicago, like with the business stuff over there. So it ended up becoming like my family's from all over the place. There is no like, oh, we all came from this state in the U.S. It's like, nah. After like the 20s, you all just went everywhere, like, and there's no like semblance. It's like the last name. Here's a funny one. So we were always told that our name was changed when we entered the like when we immigrated from Radskowski to Radner. That was the store we were sold for ever. This is like the old family story. Come to find out, it's like no, that's not what happened at all. Like, like I've went back and looked at the paperwork. Like we entered as Radners, we stayed. There was no name change. Like this is just a made up thing. And I'm like, what? What was the reason for this? I've been looking for for files and documents for the last couple years for stuff that doesn't exist. Like,
Well, it's funny you say it's actually my mom, their names were changed when my mom's parents, and so they were the most Jewish names I've ever heard. So her parents' last names are now Robin and Brown, but when they came over, they were Rabinowitz and Bronstein. Like
yeah, there's no
Rabinowitz
hiding
and
that one.
Bronstein. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. I guess they just decided Radner had a American enough twang to it that
Yeah,
they
yeah.
let it pass. But no, it was crazy learning about some of that stuff, like the whole like immigration pattern and like where we all went. It's like they just went all over the place. Like
Yeah.
there was like my grandfather worked in Chicago for a while and did like running, so you would ride bikes back and forth to deliver packages to unsavory people. That was like how you made money back then as a Jewish kid, because that was the business. Like, it's like now you look at it, it's like yeah, all the areas where I have photos of them growing up, like those pictures of old school Chicago, old school New York, and those areas where it's like the Jewish communities, and now those same areas are like everybody's getting shot. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a gun, it's just a war zone. It looks like West Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
It's like this is a mess. Like it's insane. But you know, Alaska. This is what I tell people: is the culture in Alaska just we don't feel that stuff because I tell everybody like the media culture, the life culture, everything here is like 20 years behind everybody else. So like we had Blockbuster Video longer than everybody. We had like you know like I grew for instance because of where I grew up was fairly rural. It's not really rural, but everybody considers it rural. It that area like growing up, even though I was born in 1999, so like when I was 12, 13, right? I should have been absorbing media from like 2012, 2013. But that wasn't the case because there wasn't media from that day and age I could get to. We didn't have cable. Like we had a projection TV, one of those old gigantic
Yeah,
projector
yeah.
TVs. I had an N64 because there was no new consoles that didn't exist. And then you know, and I'd borrow games from other people randomly, but they were 20 miles away, so that didn't happen very often.
Wait,
So I got
N64 in 2012. That's pretty late.
yeah, no, that's what that's why I still to this day like retro games. I don't
Yeah,
play like new stuff very
because they're not
often at
retro to
all.
you.
Yeah, it's not. It's just that's what I grew up with.
Yeah.
So I did you know, I would go borrow games, but they were 20 miles away, so I got really good at like Super Smash Bros on the N64 and like very specific titles because I just play the same game over and over again. But we had this thing called Bob's Mini Market, which was the like store. He ran on credit. so you could go charge to the store like a fucking old timey like old west place. This is up till I was 15. This is how we lived. So you could go in there and go like, I need 2 cans of spam, a bag of rice, and some soda pop, and like charge it to your store account. Like,
Wow.
and then he had a laundromat in the building, and he had showers, and he also had a movie rental business. He had like a wall of these like plastic things that he'd slot the covers for the movies in. And it was just a crapshoot whether you got a VHS or a DVD for the longest time. But we had both players for the TV. And then eventually he separated them. But all the movies were older. So it wasn't like you were getting movies from 2013. That would happen occasionally. But most of the time you were getting a movie from like somewhere in the 90s or the 80s. So in that range. So when I was growing up, like I grew up on like action movies and like
Yeah.
mysteries and comedies, like slapstick comedies and stuff. So my sense of humor and all of that was all 10, 15 years behind everybody else. So while everybody was being quote PC and kind of clamping down on that stuff in 2015, 2016, I was like like you
Yeah.
guys are pussies. Like
Yeah.
this is just normal like banter. Like you
Yeah.
guys everybody talks about like the Modern Warfare 2 lobby thing. It's like, well, I didn't have that, but best believe with four brothers, like there was some pretty mean
Yeah.
things said sitting around playing, N64 or any console for that matter. So
Yeah. Yeah. I can't say well I had an Atari when I was growing up until I was like not that I'm not that old, but my parents, didn't get me a new console until I was a decent amount older. So I was playing Atari for the longest time when I was a little kid and
it's the only game my dad's good at. He destroys at Pong,
oh
and it's
really?
because when that game came out when he was like
Yeah.
20 or something like that. So he was just playing it a lot,
Yeah.
And so even now, like I had an emulator that I bought from like Walgreens that gave you like the fake Atari joystick so you
Mhm.
could plug it into your TV and play Pong. And he just it's
Dominated
like
you.
snapped right back into it, and it's like this
Yeah.
is stupid. Like,
Yeah.
let's play Call of Duty.
Yeah.
Like, I shit on you. Like,
No, no, keep on Pong and Pac-Man. That's where he's got his where he's good. Yeah, I had Atari and then I ended up getting a Sega eventually. That was what I grew up on. Atari and Sega.
Shannon, stop being an ageist. uh, yeah, that was it was an interesting way to grow up. I had we lived in a place called Big Lake, Alaska, but we owned like this little corner lot. It was like a little over an acre. But it was just a cabin, and we had a little like playground thing. We burned all our trash. We had a wood stove. We had a propane furnace, but propane you had to go places to go get propane, and then on top of it you had to like hope that you could get the pilot to light for that stove because it was the same stove that had been in that cabin for since we bought the place in the 90s. So they we just switched to doing the wood stove, and then after we got rid of the propane like cooking stove, we swapped to just cooking on the wood stove too, and then everything was done with that. So then it was like, okay, every day you gotta go cut wood, and then wood's gotta come back and get split, and um we sold wood for extra money, and yeah, it was I learned at a very young age how to be self-sufficient.
Yeah.
So if I'm
No, I
like,
mean useful skills. I mean,
yeah, none of it was useless. It was all stuff that's like still a day where I'm like, yeah, if I want to really move somewhere, like all I need to do is have enough to buy a little tiny patch of land, and I know how to like live on it.
nice.
Like like I'm pretty confident I could figure this out. Like
I'm definitely not confident. I would die pretty quickly. So I have my bug out bag, but
52 is the new 30.
I mean I got a bug out bag, but I once I actually bug out, I don't know how I'm gonna survive.
Yeah,
I need to find you and then have
I
you help me.
think that's something I'm sort of launching or soft launching on YouTube is sort of a like, I don't know, Alaskan ghetto life advice. Like just talking about like, hey, this is like what to do if you're in this situation. Just because a lot of those situations I think I've dealt with, like we've had you know, we had a period of time where, I mean, we had electric on the property, but for most of the time we used a generator because, for a while that we just didn't use power because it was like, this is expensive and it's cheaper to just use the fuel in the generator. So we just swapped for the last 10 years we lived at that place. It was
Wow.
all generator power. So it's like we had a well. I grew up drinking, I'm sure, tons of lead and chemicals, I'm sure. But the well was well built.
Well, no fluoride though, right? So
No,
there's
no,
that.
it tasted like it was straight up mineral water. It tasted like minerals. And you'd have little black specks floating on the bottom of it when you drank it cuz when you filled it up. After a while we swapped to buying water. The last like 2 years I lived there cuz the well got pretty nasty. But it had been there since the place was built, and that area had shitty groundwater. So
Making me feel real spoiled. I just had a Topo Chico sparkling water like 5 minutes before our
hey,
podcast. So.
I live in an apartment now, so I don't want anybody to get the misconception. But I just I think a lot of people like I've been working class now where I make a little bit of money enough that I can pay all my bills and that stuff, and I'm like, eh, I'm no more happy now than I was when I was living like that.
Yeah.
So I'm not worried. What it did for me was it just lifted the weight of like, what if you move and something doesn't work, or what if you make this decision and this doesn't work out? It's like, if it doesn't work out, I'll just go live in the woods again. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not really that, like, it's not a big deal. Like, I'll lose some weight over a year. It'll probably be good for my health. Like,
No, it's
uh,
definitely good to have those skills, and they never leave your brain. So I don't have any of them. So I
I'm
I
jealous.
need to.
Also, Shannon says, well, I'm jealous about the moose in Alaska. Moose are terrifying creatures.
Yeah, I had no idea how big they were until like Twitter videos started going viral, and I was like, holy crap.
JC, look at those wooden panels. This entire apartment is made out of paper fucking mache, dude. I've talked about this before. So I only stay this place. There are no nice apartments in the town I live in. They're all old and run down and shit. This place is fine, but it's just a 2 bedroom little spot. But it's technically employee housing. It's impossible to get living down here because unless you buy a house, there are no rentals available during the summer because this is a tourist town. And so all of the people who need to work come down and rent out all the places for your 6 months out of the year instead of staying year round like I do. So it screws over a lot of people. So I'm lucky enough to have an employer that owns an apartment complex, so they work that in, and so I get a little bit of a break on rent. So like this place is 800 a month, plus my
I mean,
Wi-Fi bill. So
man, that is cheap, but yeah.
yeah, no, it's great because again, but I'm also working for him, so that's sort of how I get a
Yeah.
break on it. And then the reality here is like if I wasn't in this place, the cheapest like 2 bedroom would be around like 14 to 1600. Um,
Okay, that's probably what it is around me. I'm in Central Texas. As long as you don't go near Austin,
mhm.
that is, I think, right around what the prices are. I haven't looked in a little bit, but
I've been
yeah.
to Austin and Houston both to do card tournaments for Magic the Gathering back in the
I
day.
don't like either of them. Austin's worse, but I don't like Houston or Austin.
Austin was that was 4 years ago. I went and it was a shithole then.
Yeah,
And the food sucked. Everybody told me the food was good, and it sucked. I didn't get good food until I left there, and then the food
uh,
got better the farther out I got.
yeah. I'm in between San Antonio and Austin, so I'm kind of in the middle of, not in the middle of nowhere, but it's 20 minutes to the nearest grocery store.
My
And
family's
yeah,
all from Alto.
okay,
I had they owned a ranch up there back in the 30s and 40s that had oil on it. So they did the whole have the people set up the oil refinery set up like in your yard.
yeah,
And so still to this day they have like two of those things running on their property, and
yeah.
it's just like you can look outside from the house that's on the property, and it's just like you're looking out on this nice view, and then in the distance there's this thing going cluck 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 cluck. It's hilarious, but it set them up because
Yeah.
it was back in the like 30s when it got found, and so they just back then they would just be like, well, we'll just buy the oil rights on the property, and they didn't have to sell any of the property rights, and they're like, well, what happens here? And they're like, well, we're just going to take the oil and we'll kick you back a percentage, and then that's it. And so they've been doing that for like 85 fucking years,
Wow.
just cranking the same setup. It's a funny situation because the family was bit on the racist side. And I've met a bunch of them, so like I've talked about it before. But bunch of them ended up croaking, and the guy who ended up inheriting everything is the judge who is he's this younger kid who was in the family. He's a nice guy. Me and him are still friendly. He was a judge over there in Texas, still is, and he married a half black woman. And because of that, he wasn't allowed on the family property
Oh
anymore.
my
They
god.
told him he couldn't go on the property. So they all kicked it within like a 2 year period. And he inherited everything. And so now he owns it and lives there with her. And it's the funniest thing to me. It's like it's the biggest like just like
Yeah, yeah.
in the world. Like it worked out kind of in the best way possible in my opinion. But that side of the family is interesting historically. But man, whew.
Yeah.
They're not my favorite people. They did not mesh well with the Alaskan kind of culture or way of carrying themselves. But that trip we took was everybody in Texas talking about how big the state is. And it was my dad was like, if you cut Alaska in half, it makes Texas the third largest state. Like, like it's like
Yeah.
he would just constantly be repeating that to people all the time, and it would just deflate their ego.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
Yeah, no, Alaska's massive. I mean,
yeah, well, it's just so disconnected. People don't think about it.
yeah.
It's like
I
we're
see somebody was asking about Childerberg. I've heard of it before. I don't know what it is though. Is that a
oh.
I've definitely heard it before.
So Childerberg is a thing that they do this big like party where the Bilderberg meeting is.
Yeah, okay,
Um,
that's that okay. I obviously know what Bilderberg is. Okay, I think
and
I definitely have heard of this.
it's a blast. There's normally like some good like Liberty Space comics and people. Robbie Bernstein normally tries to go out to it. There's but it's grown every year now. Now they like rent out a whole campground and stuff, and I there's a bunch of events like that I'd like to try to go to this year. It all depends on timing with me cuz
Where is it? I is where Bilderberg is?
um I think I'm going to look up the website.
Yeah, I've been wanting to go to more kind of liberty-minded events. I used to go to them a decent amount. Like I was telling you before the stream, I used to go to like Mises events back in 2012-ish and that sort of stuff, but I haven't been going to any in a while.
Yeah. Um I'm trying to find it. Maybe
Don't worry about it.
yeah,
I doubt I'd be able to go
I
anyway, but
think it's somewhere near South Austin,
oh, if it's
south
south
of
of
Austin.
Austin, then I actually could go. That's if it's south of
Yeah,
Austin, that's like right where I am. So
if it's over there, that's right up your neck of the woods. So that's
okay, well now
perfect.
I have to Google it. Okay.
Cheap houses around here are $600. Yeah, I've seen like so Florida because I'm looking at over there. I mean, comparing the rental costs from like even Pensacola or Panama City Beach, which are two of the areas I've looked at, to where I'm at now, it's like 30% less than here. So I can get a 2 bedroom house even over there still for like 1100 a month
Yeah.
versus like the most you could get for that over here is a 1 bedroom apartment. And so it's like, yeah, you can get more for it, which means they can build out a studio and have a little bit better spot to do shows from and stuff and just kind of work over there. The other thing is I've realized like just broadening the way that I try to make money, there's in Alaska there's a huge market for like boats, fishing boats and just boats in general. And so, I've sold a few over, with my dad and other people over the years, but there's good deals to be had in Florida in that area because there's so many people who own them that the market is way lower than it is in Alaska. So I've seen fishing boats that are for sale in Florida for like 4 or 5 grand. that if you brought them up here to Alaska, you could slap 20,000 on it and make it.
You just
And
got
so
to go
I'm
through the
like,
Panama Canal and all the way up with it.
yeah, well, my dad has experience doing fishing and all that kind of stuff. He worked on crab boats and did charter stuff back in the day. So he's and he used to up until about 10 years ago, we owned a boat, uh, a decent size, like 45 foot, you know, which was nice enough. We could have taken it over. He took it pretty far out. I never went on those trips because I'm not a big unsteady under my feet person.
Yeah.
I don't get seasick. I don't like heights for the same reason. Like you can put me in the world's tallest skyscraper, it doesn't bother me, but the second that thing moves under my feet, I'm losing it.
Yeah.
Cuz it's I think it's a nature of being big. I'm like anything unsteady, I'm out. Like
Hey, gravity affects us the same, man.
uh try not to rent the cheapest condo in Florida. Yeah, you might end up on the first floor.
Yeah. I always say you should have the worst house in on your block, so that way it's like you're in a safer community than you can afford.
That's actually good. uh, yeah, I have no, I don't think I'd do a condo or apartment when I move. I think I'll have to do a house because I want to have a space I can stream from and have like a legit studio.
Yeah.
Eventually, I'd like to make enough with whatever gig I have that I can just have a house with an extra room so I can just convert that thing over to like a place somebody can stay. Because I think one of the big ways smaller like channels, quote unquote, or streamers could really kind of branch out. And I have other friends who are doing something similar to this is like you're a lot more likely to get somebody in a show if you have an in-person studio. If you just go, hey, I'll pay for your ticket and you have a place to stay. Like you get a free trip out of the deal. Like you can pick what dates I fly you back. Like, you know, and that's a lot cheaper to do from Florida. Like, that would be impossible for me to do here because it'd
Yeah.
be like, yeah, it's a $300 cab ride from the airport to where I live, and then the ticket's gonna be $950. Like it's like so. Versus there where it's like, yeah, I could probably swing flying a guest out probably once a month, which would bring in, some extra eyes and extra kind of, you know, um, drive around the channel and just around streams and stuff. And it also is cool because you get to build some more like actual relationships with people to have like stuff in the future with projects,
Yeah.
which I think you don't get as much from like the, uh, one time passing stuff.
No, definitely. I'm working in our spare bedroom right now. That's my office, and yeah, I'm super cramped in here. We actually want to build. We were because we eventually want to have kids, my fiance and I, and then the actual guest bedroom shares a wall with this, so I can't be 3D printing all loud with a kid sleeping over there.
Yeah,
So we eventually we were thinking of building a like a nice office in the backyard and have like it be a decent size, electricity, all that stuff, and then I would want a little setup kind of just where you can invite people over and do something live. Because right now, I mean, you would be sitting right next to me right here if
right.
I wanted it.
Yeah.
I have no space in here.
Yeah, I want to get that a similar kind of setup actually if I had my own property would be to separate it entirely like that. One way I've seen a couple people do that before with they'll go get like one of those Home Depot or Lowe's sheds and then just insulate it.
Yeah.
Like cuz you can I mean the building materials, the cost of it these days in a lot of cases it's cheaper to just go buy the pre-made one and put it together than it is to build it with the individual lumber.
Yeah, it depends on what because it might add to the value of the house when we
Right.
ever if we call it like an in-law suite or a gym or something like that. But yeah, yeah, that is the goal because you can't really tell here, but it is cramped in here. Whenever I
Yeah.
film for a video, if I have to set up a light and then my tripod, literally, I'm like, I can't tell you how many times in my video you'll see like a print I'm showing off and it's rotating. I'm laying down on the ground just like in a prone position because this is the only spot I fit where you can't see me on camera. So yeah.
I mean, in this room is kind of the what place I do this from right now is my bedroom, and I can back this up, so I just have the black background with the posters, which is normally how I have it. But I had to do it this way tonight because the way I've got my cords behind me wired up.
Mhm.
But yeah, that kind of helps it look a little better because it's just a blank background. It's flat. No one can see anything. But yeah, it's like, I mean, this is a bedroom, so I've got like a bed and nightstand and all that kind of random shit in here. So it's when I move over, I want to have the ability to, like, okay, if it's just me in the place, then I need a 2 bedroom. If it's me and someone else, then I need a 3 bedroom.
Yeah.
Because I need to have an extra bedroom for the studio, and then part of the living room can be, a secondary kind of setup, so that if I have a guest over, they can be in that room and I can go into the other room, vice versa. Um, and I think that, I'll probably design something, but come up with like some folding couches and shit like that. Make it look as generic as possible so it can be, utilitarian. But I think uh I think that works better if you're trying to grow stuff out, because the problem with like making a show, and I've learned this quick, is like you're making something everybody else is making. So it's
Mhm.
just like there has to be something specific. So for me, it's like I try to talk to different people from all over the place. I'm not focusing on one like area of the internet. I don't want to put myself in like that box of a niche. So I've just been like, okay, I'm going to interview everybody. Like, just find interesting people. Uh, and then, the other thing too is just like the personality side of it, where when, you do the panel shows, stuff like that, I'm a little more, it's more of me ranting. And I have a tendency to do that. uh, um, what is this one? It's not a legit libertarian podcast without the domestic terrorist poster in the background setup. Yeah. I used to have the Budweiser posters up. I have to send one of those to Dickie Walnuts, one of the
Wow.
people who watches this show.
I've got my J Stark poster right there that just says "Live free or fucking die" right on the bottom, and so I
So,
should have that behind me.
before we get towards the end here and stuff, can you break down for people in the chat or people who watch us who don't know what is the story behind Jay Stark? I've watched part of the documentary and I've watched a bunch of stuff on YouTube, so I know to an extent, but the history of it.
Yeah, so Jay Stark, for anybody who hasn't watched it, it is a truly entertaining documentary called Plastic Defense by God, I follow like a Popular Defense. They made a really good documentary about the guy. So he was a designer located in Europe, and he basically helped to start one of the main 3D printed gun communities called Deterrence Dispensed, and he started it up because he was seeing the files on Cody Wilson's website and realizing they're not very useful. They weren't actually practically useful. They just looked like they were. And so he got together with a guy named Ivan the Troll, and they were the two main developers on the FGC 9, that gun behind me. That's the second iteration of it. And so I think he's credited as the main designer of the FGC 9, and he did it all in Europe. So under the strictest regulations possible. I think he was even located in Germany. I don't think he was German, but anyway, he was the main guy involved in that. Oh my god, now my timing is all messed up. Time flies so quickly now. I think it was, geez, I think it was 2022. Maybe it was the end of 21.
It might have been. I think it was the end of 2021, but I might
Okay.
be wrong too.
Yeah, my time, it just flies right now. I still think it's 2020 right now. But he ended up getting raided, and it is still very hazy. I don't truly understand the story, but he died of a heart attack, and he's a young guy who, like, he was, I think, in his early 20s.
He got Breitbarted.
Yeah, I don't know. There are stories that there are people in this community who knew him personally, and you may have to ask them specifics. But the story is that he had a heart attack after being raided by the police. Now, was it caused by the police, or did the police, kill him, and
Right.
this is their story. I don't know, but he is a truly remarkable guy. He was more American than almost any American I ever met, and he wasn't actually American. He held the ideas. His slogan was live free or die, which is, and he named himself after, I think, one of the founding fathers, John Stark. What's his name?
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
yeah,
It's something Stark. I know the figure.
yeah, and he understands the Second Amendment better than any other American. He truly was a interesting guy, and yeah, like he said, live free or die. These are not empty words, and he died for the cause, basically. So he is the most revered person in our community because he stood on his morals, and did it in a situation where it actually takes balls. Like, it's, somebody might say I have balls for making these videos, and it's like, it's completely legal for me to do this.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
a completely different story doing what he was doing.
Yeah, yeah. I think yeah, and that's why I made it similar in the sense the way reason I made the Joe Vogler documentaries that I put together was he was a figure that over here in Alaska built up like a political movement for independence back in the 70s, and he figured out a way to argue it to the UN, and so he did, and eventually got Iran to sign on to make him a speaker so he could go to the UN and make an argument for it. And he was killed 2 or 3 days before leaving for that flight to go to New York to speak. And it's one of those things where it was chalked up to this murder case, and this guy pled no contest, and so there wasn't any evidence presented, and so there wasn't much to go off of. But I was able to put together a story that I think was a little more compelling in a sense, because this is a guy who was like, they basically the way it went down was, they were looked at as kind of a joke in the beginning. And then he got like 15,000 signatures in the state saying that we should have a vote on independence. And then it got bigger because in the media in the state picked it up, and a lot of the local broadcasting radio stuff picked it up. And then by the early 90s in the state, like, independence was being talked about more commonly, to the point where the AIP, the Alaska Independence Party, became the or the second most popular party in the state,
Wow.
briefly. So it was beating the Democrats and was competing with the Republicans. And then in '92, a guy named Hickel won the governorship in the state of Alaska. And he did not win it as a Republican or Democrat. He won it as an Alaskan Independence Party member. And so it made this Joe Vogler guy the chair of the party who was in charge of the state. And then he got killed like right before getting to go give a speech on the subject. And so it's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, I think this guy was assassinated. Like, the same, and with Jay Stark, that whole thing. I mean, I think I've looked into it enough to go, this reeks.
Yeah.
Like, this is like, this glows to fucking hell and back. It's like, it is to me similar to the Breitbart situation, where it's like this guy kind of proclaims media war with a certain group of people, and then poof, heart attack.
And
Like,
even crazier because he was in his early 20s.
right,
Breitbart was
yeah,
like late
right.
40s or 50.
If
Yeah.
you're over 50, it's like he's somewhat of a write off. You go back to like the Anthony Scalia,
Yeah.
with the with the gun decision, and then poof, oh, he
Yeah.
died. He was in
Yeah.
the woods. Oops.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like, how many of these are we like? Let's roll the dice. Like, we
Yeah.
we know
And,
Epstein didn't kill himself.
and what are
Like,
the odds he got the heart attack literally right after he was raided? It's like, yeah, I mean,
yeah.
it's,
Well, it's sort of like, even if they didn't, like, in my opinion, what most likely happens is just like the CIA playbook says, you make it look like an accident, or you tie it in with natural causes. Like, that's how you get that done. And my opinion has always been, well, they probably just like give these people some kind of toxin. Like, I mean,
yeah.
there's 1,000 of them that do that exact same thing that you
Yeah.
wouldn't test for.
And when you want to talk about threat to the state, I mean, it doesn't
Yeah,
get
you
much
don't get more than that.
than Jay Stark, where it's like he's literally teaching people across the world how to make your own gun, to the point where literally people in Myanmar fighting a government are using
Right.
his design. So it's
It's
like he's as big a
it's
threat as it gets.
it's on a giant scale, you know.
Yeah.
The reason I brought up Vogler in that sense is because it's like, yeah, he was, if he was assassinated, he was assassinated for attempting to literally take a state from the government, from the
Yeah.
feds. Like, that's a pretty big, like, so it's like, yeah, it makes perfect sense that they want this guy taken out as quick as possible.
Well,
Like,
that's why I think people like Suckboy Tony, like I talked about earlier, he's doing it has nothing to do with the FGC9, but I consider kind of the next iteration of a completely made at home gun that
in the
works.
evolution of 3D
Yeah.
printing guns,
Yeah,
right?
and I've tried to bug hey, if you donate to the NRA, stop, donate to Suckboy Tony instead. Like I'm who knows, he is such a threat in the same way that it's like, I mean, who knows, maybe they'll get him for tax evasion even though he never did it, sort of thing. So
Yeah, it's
I
almost
want people like
protect
him
him
to
at
be
all cost.
yeah, I want him to be supported and
Well,
you know,
I have a quote in the documentary that I made about Vogler where I say, maybe the next time somebody like this comes along, we'll make sure he doesn't get assassinated. And it might be a similar situation where, hey, this guy's here. Let's make sure he's not, like, dead in a ditch because some federal agent gets a hair up his ass.
yeah, and
Protect his dogs.
protect his dogs, and like and it's like you want to actually who's doing the most I was talking about how as part of the Mises Institute and everything a while ago, and I was always like, oh, this is great, but it's all talk. We're not doing anything. And so I kind of that's why I love this community so much, because it's like, oh no, we're doing something. And
Yeah,
when you
there's
talk
an
about like who is doing something to protect the Second Amendment, is it the NRA or is it people like Suckboy Tony? And it's like nobody is doing more to protect individuals' ability to own self-defense than people in this community. And that's why I'm like, I always try to not me, I'm not a designer, but like the designers, flood them with your donations. If you are going to donate to the NRA, don't do that.
yeah.
Who's
Well,
actually
and
defending your rights?
Well, and again, it's like, and there's this whole movement of people who are like, well, I subscribe to this thing because it's firearm insurance. If I have to use my self defense, like, yeah, that's called an attorney. Like,
Yeah,
you need a retainer. That's what that's called. Like, you're not gonna get any protection that's worth a damn from something like that. Like, now protecting your rights. Give some money to these people. Like, these people, it's the agar solution to this problem, which is far more
yeah,
applicable in the firearm situation. And the same is true up in Alaska. Like, there is no firearm regulation here because good luck regulating them. Like,
yeah.
again, there's 3 times the firearms that people here. Like, it's like you're
And that's
never
the
gonna.
that's the point of this movement. By the time you regulate it, it's too late. And that's kind
Yeah,
of why it's like I want to get Suckboy Tony on his 5th iteration of his gun before any regulations come down, because then it's like, oh well, the cat's out of the bag now. So
yeah.
yeah,
It's already developed. All right. Well, I think we had a great conversation, about an
yeah.
hour and a half. Go ahead and plug all your stuff so people can find you and all that
Sure.
jazz.
Yeah. My main channel, so it's just 3D printing, no guns, is the 3D Print General. So that's only if you care about 3D printing specific. And then I have my other channel, 3D Pew General, PEW. And that one, YouTube was coming after it again. So it's really just, I have a podcast on that channel where I interview people in the 3D printed gun community. And then once a month, I do like a funny news segment. And that's kind of all that channel is now. And then after that, I'm 3D Print General on Twitter. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I got a book and random other stuff too.
Yeah, I was watching some of the funny news clip videos.
Oh,
Those are
hey.
great. That's
Yeah, I was
that's
thinking of wearing my ATF outfit for this, but decided not
No,
to.
I think this is fine. That thumbnail turned out good though. I had to fix the spelling error. I that shout out to Reed Hearted on Twitter for DMing me and going, "Hey, I don't know if you caught this, but I think your spell check missed that."
I just leave up my spelling errors, just live
Oh
with it.
god, yeah, I know. There's some of the old ones are still up. All right, well, thank you everybody. You guys
Yeah.
know where to follow me at Liberty Leighton, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.